Story 1. There was this one guest who demanded a room upgrade because their aura didn't vibe with the one they booked. When told no, they started yelling, cursed the staff, and threatened to leave a bad review, only to call back later asking for a discount because they forgot their wallet. Story 2. Probably the guy at a stag party who managed to soil himself in the lobby and then ran away pursued by security as he left a trail of diarrhea across the lobby, up the stairs, in the elevator, and so on, like the world's worst Hansel and Gretel. When security caught up to the surprisingly fast drunk guy, he had made it to the first floor public bathroom and flooded it while trying to flush his trousers and underwear. Just standing there, runny diarrhea dripping down his legs and fully exposed. Story 3. Either the regular in room 222 who always wet his bed, or the couple in room 250 that were staying with us after their house had burned down, who would inspect their towels each night, and any tiny spot would come exchange them with the front desk, then inspect those. This was a little no-tell motel that sold rooms for $25 a night in 1990. It mainly catered to construction workers, cheap business travelers, and people who balked at an identification with their credit card because they weren't using their real name. Story 4. We had a guest whose child accidentally walked a bowel movement 12 feet in a line into the pool and then demanded we clean up their child's mess. Then they were upset that we had to close the pool. We also had an unsettling encounter with an older gentleman who repeatedly asked me to bring rubber duckies to his room for his bath every night in a 5-star hotel, and I would always just nervously laugh. I'm living in far north Queensland in Australia, where there are many creatures. They sometimes get in no matter how nice the hotel is. It's the rainforest. We had a guest from New Zealand come screaming at us about a lizard infestation because she had found a 1-inch gecko in her room. She claimed her kids were afraid. They were not. And it was unsanitary and unsafe. We removed the lizard, and she demanded an entirely new room. Then she left a very nasty review because one of us cracked a smile at the term lizard infestation. I have so many weird stories I can't even remember half of them. Edit. This seems to be primarily a gecko thread now. Here's a video I took of a gecko fight I saw on my porch the other night. Lizard tax. Story 5. It all started when the guest checked in late one evening. He seemed normal enough until he asked, "Does my room come with a microwave?" I told him it didn't. He looked absolutely devastated and said, "I cannot survive without a microwave." I offered to warm something up for him if needed, but that wasn't good enough. He stormed out and came back an hour later, dragging a full-size microwave he'd purchased from a nearby store. The trouble really started at 3 a.m. when the fire alarm went off, waking the entire hotel. Turns out Mr. Midnight Microwave decided to cook a steak in his new appliance. Not just heat it, he'd seasoned it, wrapped it in foil, and popped it in like it was an oven. The foil caused a small fire, which set off the sprinklers in his room. By the time we got there, his room was soaked, the microwave was destroyed, and he was trying to save his steak by patting it dry with hotel towels. When asked why he'd thought this was a good idea, he replied, "I didn't know microwaves couldn't cook steak. This is your fault for not having one in the room in the first place." Needless to say, he was charged for the damage, and the room was out of commission for weeks. Story 6. I used to work as a night receptionist at a hotel in Jalandhar, India, a few years ago. Most nights were uneventful, but one guest will forever be burned into my memory. It was around 2 a.m. when a man came stumbling to the front desk, looking panicked. He whispered, "There's someone in my room." Naturally, I was alarmed. I immediately checked the system to ensure he hadn't been double-booked, but everything looked fine. I offered to check the room with him. As we entered, I turned on the lights, and there it was, the intruder. It was a life-sized cutout of a Bollywood actor that we had placed in the hallway for a promotion earlier that day. For some reason, he had brought it into his room, propped it in a corner, and forgotten about it. I tried to keep a straight face as he muttered something about being too tired and shuffled back to bed. The next morning, he checked out like nothing had happened. But I'll never forget having to rescue someone from their own cardboard celebrity at 2 a.m. Story 7. Probably the person who defecated into the ice machine, or the one who mugged a blind woman and stole her cane, or the one who turned on the fire hose and flooded their floor. Oh wait, that was the same person who defecated into the ice machine. Or the one who hit me because an ice storm occurred. The phones were down, and I had to knock on doors if they had scheduled wake-up calls. Story 8. We had a guest who clearly had a pet in his bag and kept denying it. The bag was squirming, and the dog inside was whining. What a selfish person to do that to the dog. Story 9. I've told this story in the hotel front desk subreddit, but here goes. An elderly woman stayed with her son who had mental disabilities. She'd sold her house and hadn't bothered to even start looking for a new place, so she was spending her money on a hotel rather than a home. After a while, I switched to another hotel and didn't give her a second thought until she started staying at that new hotel. She had built up a lot of reward points and would pay for her room with those points whenever possible. One day, her point reservation was up, and when she came in, I waved her over and quietly asked if she wanted to use points again for that night or pay with a card. She said she'd pay, and I thought that would be it. Nope. The next day, I was told that a guest complained about me, which I assumed was a joke. No, she had made a complaint about me, saying that I had screamed at her, in front of a lobby full of people, that she owed me money. I refused to have anything to do with her after that. Story 10. One night, a suspicious man came in wearing a really long coat. He looked like trouble and seemed like he hadn't slept for weeks. He paid in cash, which even 2 years ago was usually a bad sign. I gave him his key and he went to his room. About 5 minutes later, he returned in a huff, yelling. He had a long object inside his coat with his hand on it. He didn't threaten me, but I was on edge. He threw the key over the desk and told me that it didn't work. I checked and let him know that it wasn't the key I gave him, so of course it didn't work. He found the right key and stormed off. About 2 hours later, the police arrived, and one officer was holding a parabolic listening device. They asked if I had checked in the man and what room he was in. He was wanted for armed robbery with a shotgun. I provided the information, and they staked out the room and arrested him when he came out. It's pretty scary thinking back on it. I'm sure the long object under his coat was the shotgun. Story 11. A man was checking into a room that was under his wife's name. She did not add his name to the room, so I could not let him in. I had to call the wife to get permission. We do this for guest safety. I couldn't get a hold of her, and he was livid. He didn't want to show me his identification. Don't you know who I am? I have been staying here for 14 years. The hotel was 4 years old. I was very new at the job as well, like 3 months. Once I did have his identification, he was threatening me and my job, saying I would regret the day I did this to him. His wife was going to kill me. Eventually, I got a hold of the wife. She gave approval. She was so sweet. I smiled and gave him the room key. He told me to go forget myself. This whole thing was like 30 minutes. Story 12. I used to work the night audit shift as a night manager, and we had this one guy who became a serious issue. He would periodically come in, and if it was early, like 2 a.m., he would stroll in. If he saw that there were 2 females, he'd claim the shower wasn't working properly. When you went up, he would start to undress when you had your back to him. Our management was absolutely terrible and didn't care, so we made it an unofficial rule that if we worked alone or it was myself and the other female, we would just tell him that our staff policy changed and now 2 people had to come up to the room. After that, he came less and less. I'm not sure what happened to him, as I was one of the 10 people that management fired because we knew what was going on at the hotel. The main manager was sleeping with the maintenance man while she was still married, and he was sleeping with her daughter, who may or may not have worked there. That was a blessing in disguise, though. I met some cool people that I still talk to today, and that was over 10 years ago. Story 13. One of the worst incidents was during my first week not in training. I was thankfully in the back office doing some reservations work instead of being at the desk. A groom emailed our team and asked us to please go into their room and get the bride's dress to steam it before their wedding the next day. We made sure we had permission to enter the room, and our staff, though very uncomfortable, got the dress. She noticed immediately that there were rips and dirty spots on the dress, which she documented with pictures as soon as she opened the dress bag. The timestamps lined up right after she got the dress, so there was no way she could have done it. The bride came down after screaming at our staff and accusing us of trying to steal her dress and then destroying it, making it unwearable. It was just a few tiny rips and smudge spots that we didn't cause. She was running around the lobby, screaming at the top of her lungs, threatening to get violent with staff, and saying her wealthy father would have the hotel closed down and all of us fired. It was a luxury hotel in a major US city. Her belief was that we stole her dress, wrecked it for fun, steamed it, and then put it back in the room. How any of that makes sense? No clue. Our manager calmly asked her to step around the desk and read the email from her fiancé telling us to do this and that the bride requested it. She accused us of lying despite the email proof from his direct email address. When the groom came down, our manager pointed out that he had asked us to do that, and he feigned ignorance. The day after the wedding, her father came down to check out and berated our staff for upsetting his daughter before her wedding and asked for discounts. We said no. Genuine concerning behavior. Hope she got therapy. Story 14. I've got a couple of stories. There's a lady who has been a regular guest at my hotel for decades and is extremely entitled. Recently, she decided she didn't like the room she was given, but rather than telling the front desk, she found a maintenance worker and convinced him to let her into a room that wasn't hers by claiming that she had lost her key. Then she proceeded to move all of her belongings into the new room. Another guest was a homeless lady who had been staying at the hotel for a few months, apparently because a friend of her father's was paying for it. One night, she was found in the dry storage room stealing food. When she was evicted, they found her room was full of giant piles of items she had apparently been stealing throughout her entire stay. It was like a hoarder's house. The next day, she snuck back into the hotel and tried to steal more belongings, then set up a camp in the parking lot until the police were called. Finally, years ago, I was working at a hostel in Kiev. We had one guest who was absolutely disgusting. He would sit in the kitchen and shovel food into his mouth while staring off into space, crumbs falling all over his body and the floor, then eventually get up and leave without cleaning up after himself. He never talked and he smelled awful. One night, when I was thankfully out with my ex-boyfriend, apparently he defecated in his sleep so badly it woke up everyone in the dorm. My coworker was unable to wake him up and he didn't seem to be breathing, so he called an ambulance. Paramedics came to revive him. Apparently, he had taken a bunch of pills while drinking. Everyone in that dorm had to sleep in the common room that night. All the bedding was thrown away, and the smell lingered for a couple of days. Story 15. I had a guest who complained that his window wasn't closing properly. I offered him a different room, but he refused and demanded I come up to fix it. He caused a huge fuss until I finally called my duty manager, another woman. He wouldn't settle down until we went up to the room to take a look. He insisted on walking behind us. When we got to the room, we insisted he go in first. He had thrown the table in his room down so it blocked the walkway past the door, and we both refused to enter the room as he clearly wanted us to do while he showed us how the window wouldn't close. My duty manager stepped in and shut the window properly. We retreated to the office and he came down again shortly after, claiming there was another issue and he needed us to come up again. When we refused, he said we were racist for not helping him. After my duty manager shut him down, we didn't see him again for the duration of his stay. He definitely wanted to get us alone in that room. Still creeped out just thinking about it. I'm not sure if he was just a predator or if he was on drugs, but his behavior was definitely erratic. Story 16. I worked in one of those all-inclusive giant hotels in Spain. For a fixed price, you have a fixed week of holidays together with thousands of other guests. Check-ins were like guiding a herd of sheep. This story is about an older lady, I assume between 60 to 70 years of age, from the United Kingdom. Before she entered the hotel, we were already informed that this guest might be troublesome. Apparently, she visited regularly, about 3 times a year, and always came by herself. The majority of her holiday week, she would hang around the check-in counter complaining about all sorts of things. My idea was that her complaints were the only way she learned how to communicate with others and effectively get rid of her loneliness. As the week progressed, my colleagues and I instinctively started to ignore her, as most of her complaints had nothing to do with the hospitality of the hotel. Ignoring her made her angry. So here we go. One evening, on her 4th day, she came running and screaming into the lobby, accusing the hotel of robbing her. She said she was already very suspicious of all the staff members. So when she took a shower that evening, she put a shoe on her dining table. When she finished her shower, according to her, the shoe was on the floor instead of on the table. So someone must have entered her room to rob her. Then she called the police and things escalated. Since the story was so full of holes, the Spanish police didn't do much. At the end of her stay, she greeted us and said, "See you in 3 months."